Bonjour, bienvenue à Habiter la vie numéro 3, le sublime. Bienvenue au terrain de jeu du Festival TransAmériques, la 15e édition. Je m'appelle Emmanuelle Jeté, je suis dramaturge adjointe au festival cette année. À noter que cette conversation se passera en anglais. So I'd like to acknowledge that we live and work on an unceded indigenous land known as Jojage by the Kanien'kehá:ka Nation and Muniang by the Anishinaabe Nation. J'invite vraiment chaque personne en ligne et ici présente à faire des recherches sur sa situation territoriale parce que Montréal demeure un lieu d'échange et de rassemblement encore aujourd'hui pour de nombreuses communautés. Pour la période de questions, j'invite les personnes en ligne à poser les questions dans la section de clavardage. Et les personnes ici présentes au QG, il y aura une perche qui va circuler vers la fin de la discussion. So I let you in good company with Jordan Tannahill and BACKXWASH and our host, Andrew Tay. Thank you very much.
Hello.
Hi.
Good morning. We were joking, it feels a bit like art church, like Sunday morning. Thank you for our unholy congregants. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, I mean, also it's 11 a.m. and to talk about like existentialism and the sublime is like, I need to get my brain turned on a little bit. Maybe we can do a little bit of a warm up or something.
Yeah, some summoning of the queer spirits for our discourse. But it's, yeah, so I'm Jordan Tannahill. My pronouns are he, him, and it's a really great honor to be here in conversation today with Andrew and Ashanti.
Yeah, and I'm Andrew Tay. I go by he, him pronouns. And I'm going to be animating the discussion, but I also hope this can be like a conversation and we can like have a nice dialogue together this morning. Yeah, I mean, Jordan, you were proposing that we go around and, you know, maybe introduce our practices. There's an interesting mic situation of regulating the person on Zoom that will be choreographing through this entire thing, so bear with us if there's any technical sound effects that happen. Think of it as part of the experience. Yeah, so maybe we can just start with that, and maybe we can start with Ashanti, and...
Thank you. Okay, so I'm Ashanti. I go by the stage name BACKXWASH, and I make hip hop and slash like industrial metal, a bit of it, and just like experimental hip hop in general. And you know, I like to tap into my catharsis, and you know, very happy to be here.
I think what was really exciting for me, so I work as a writer and director, and I'm representing a piece here at the festival today called Declarations, which was a sort of like a minimal dance theater piece that was programmed last year for the festival. Of course, it couldn't happen last year, and because it's a Toronto-based production with Canadian Stage, we weren't able to rehearse this year, so we're doing a staged reading of the piece at the festival this year. But what's really interesting about, I guess, the discussion for me today about the sublime and I think we'll talk a little bit about ritual as well, queer ritual, in a kind of, you know, and also like what is within a kind of queer secular context, what is sacred and what is profane, and sort of a lot of exciting kind of intersections between hopefully our three practices. The piece itself, Declarations, is it was written sort of in response to my mother's terminal cancer diagnosis as a kind of way of reckoning with, you know, the impending loss of her, but also just loss in general. And it's sort of an accounting, sort of an imperfect archive of a life, sort of sort of a litany of images, sensations, sense memories, and fragments of a life. It's kind of told through this kind of rule-based gestural score and sort of repetitive text, essentially. And very much, I think how it functions, I guess, in a theater when it's performed is very much as a kind of ritual, sort of a way of processing, a secular ritual, if you will, of processing loss, but also processing what it is to be alive and to have lived.
That's great. I mean, I'm already hearing like a few, or also what I know of Ashanti's work, like some interesting connections about death and kind of queer magic and ritual. I mean, it's also a big part of my practice. I'm always curious to talk to other artists about how they're engaging with these kinds of things. So yeah, I'm wondering, Ashanti, how that comes into your work and your practice. And
Yeah, so recently, I guess within the past 2 or 3 years, there's been an intersection on just, the concept of ritual in general and just ritual as it refers to myself, because I was discovering, practices that I was told not to go into because I was raised in a really Christian home. But if you look at it from a pre-colonial context, a lot of us were um, practicing, our traditions right before, the colonizers taught us that it was wrong. So there was a lot of rediscovering of that, as well as, putting it into the work that you're doing and watching it come together. It's ever since I kind of brought that forward, it's just like strange, like things have been happening, and strange but good things. Like when we were doing the Polaris event, we saw a hawk sit on the balcony for like 2 minutes, and that like usually never happens in like a big city. So that feedback loop just gives me like enough confidence to practice my spiritual practices, but as well as my own personal rituals, because the weird relationship that I have with my country means I can't really go back and learn from the elders. I have to essentially learn from people who are willing to teach me, or kind of like incorporate my own rituals with the practices that I read about. And that, I feel, comes into the music, because whatever I do, I make sure that I'm respecting my ancestors and respecting myself.
Ashanti, I'm curious, who are some of the guides you've had along that journey of discovery, whether they're like books or people in your life who've been kind of...
It was mostly just like, okay, there were books, definitely, but it was also just going back to your experiences when you're younger and being like, oh, see, when Auntie said this, there's a reason why, another auntie came by and said, hey, don't teach her that. Like there's a reason for this. And it's just like going back into that time and kind of like reliving these moments and relating it to the stuff that you're learning, and just making your own version of it, because being a queer person me makes it like pretty complicated to go to some of the teachers. But yeah, I think it's just a mixture of like books and like lived personal experiences.
yeah, that's super interesting. I think it's a territory a lot of artists are navigating right now, this kind of balance between like the creation of your own yeah, rituals, your own practice, and then also being considerate of what has come before. And so this also makes me think of something you were saying, Jordan, about like, the sacred versus like the profane in some ways. Like, how can we respect? And then there's such a big part of queer culture that is about disrespecting. Like, like we disrespect in order to see something new in something. So I'm just wondering if maybe both of you could chat about that in relationship to how, yeah, you work, or how does disrespect, or like, I mean, maybe that's a bad word, but like, how does that come into your work? And
Well, I think about profanity often in relation to systems of power or tradition, and I think it's really interesting, Ashanti, that you mentioned your Christian upbringing. I also had a super Christian upbringing. My father is very religious. Both of his brothers are ministers in the Lutheran Church, and I wonder if that kind of early pedagogy and faith and I mean, like I was read the Bible every night at my dad's house, and you know, with that, because it occupies such a strong part of our sense of our own kind of like our foundational mythology, and even the way that we tell stories or understand the world, that we have to kind of replace it with something at some point when we embrace our queer identity or post-colonial identity or whatever it is. Like we need to find a surrogate or you know, a new system of the sacred to replace the, you know, replace the Christianity in this case. And and so for me, I think the act, like the you know, profanity in the piece in my work, and any, you know, like a lot of my work does deal with Christian mythology in various ways, including like rewriting the story of Lot's wife in Sodom, in my play Sunday in Sodom. I think the act of profanity in that case, or blasphemy, maybe more specifically, more accurately, is an act of reclamation and a kind of like joyful queering of systems that have kind of been traumatic or oppressive in some way in the past.
Yeah, I feel the same way, in which, you know, being raised in such a Christian upbringing, you know, when I finally came to grips that I was, you know, queer, it's like a whole like world behind me collapsed, because you're taught this like restrictions of how to behave and how to conduct yourself when you're kind of like raised in this way. And when you start questioning that, you start questioning like a lot of things as well. And I feel like the profane in that aspect is just reclaiming all of that power that people thought that they had on you, and kind of like stripping it, you know, away. And, you know, like in my music, it's usually me just mostly proclaiming that I don't believe in this anymore, and this was used to oppress me, and, you know, I'm in another place. The last album, God Has Nothing to Do With It, kind of like fit those themes a lot. And I had a discussion with someone who was saying, well, you know, I would understand why people feel weird listening to like the album from like a Christian mindset, but it's based on my experiences, and in order for me to be at peace, I need to reclaim and empower myself from those experiences. And I think that just intertwines when you put so much of your feelings and identity into your work. It just, you know, comes out as harsh as you want it to be.
I was going to say too, in relation to the sublime we're talking about today. I think for me, it's also about making space for for nature, and for a nature that is not dogmatic. So, like for instance, I feel like for me, when I Ashanti, when I heard first read the title of your album, God has nothing to do with this, so leave him out of it. For me, it's such a beautiful statement, and for me, that the way that I interpreted it is like the natural world, life, death, the cosmos. They're so sublime and impossibly kind of complex and perfect, and also yet simple in a way that like I find so often, for me at least, dogma has kind of obscured their true sublimity. And I think about those ideas like that. I feel like are also embedded in at times in like Jenny Haval's music. Talking about like before God, or like ants knowing nothing about God, and and that there's a kind of perfect sacred beauty of the natural world, the natural realm. And I think for me, in Declarations, Declarations is very much a kind of it's an archive of lived experience of nature, of the natural world, of bodies, living, dying, and returning to nature. And I think for me, that's the kind of sublime that I'm interested in kind of exploring and articulating and making space for, and kind of reclaiming, I guess, from organized religion.
Absolutely. And an interesting I guess, thing is, you know, I think dogmatic or blasphemous art has existed for like the longest. If you look at, you know, Norwegian black metal and their rise to like that blasphemous art. But, you know, I think from where queers express it, it's different. It's not just like, you know, an edgy atheist on like Reddit, just, you know, just like God doesn't exist, you know. I think this is, you know, creating space, as you said, for people who might feel this way, and, you know, giving also a space for them to kind of like empower themselves. And there's a beautiful nature to that. You know, if you look at like our queer elders and what they had to go through, and it's just creating space and history for, you know, people in the future as well to be able to express themselves, to be, say, if you're thinking like this, there's nothing wrong with it, and it's totally fine. I think there's something really beautiful about that.
I think that there's something interesting also in these definitions of the sublime, like that I feel like in romantic art, there was the nature kind of sublime, like landscapes. And then we can also talk about which, because we're talking a lot about queerness today, and I feel like there's this relationship between this kind of like something that you can't define that is like you know, you see it, it's like super powerful, but you can't like articulate it. And I think that's also a queer space in some way. Like we can also say that that's like a sublime experience, an aesthetic experience. But then I also relate that to queerness. Like if I see a queer object, or like, you know, someone who's expressing themselves in a way that I am like, oh my God, that's like so like I cannot put, it's so specific, but I cannot describe exactly what it is. Yeah, I feel these, and I also feel that in both of your works in different ways. Yeah.
I've actually got like a funny story about reclamation. I think we were doing Pride last year, and you know, because of the theme of the album, they were asking us what we wanted as a background, and we were like, oh, can we put like a church on fire? And they're like, no, that would be like too much. And one of like I think the designer is like queer as well, and they're like, oh, what do you want? It's like, oh, we wanted like a church on fire, but they said no. It's like, really? Then he put out like his like portfolio with him just making like the most blasphemous like queer art that I've ever like seen, just like going through it. And it's just like, yeah, no, it's fine. Like that's tame compared to like the stuff that I have. I was like, okay. Thank you very much.
I'd be curious to know, Shanti, as well, about we're talking about sort of like Norwegian death metal, and I feel like my knowledge isn't super extensive, but I feel like it's really also drawing on these kind of like super pagan traditions that have been sort of like suppressed by Protestantism in Scandinavia for a few centuries, and I wondered like to what extent paganism as such has any kind of role. I mean, I feel like I don't necessarily have a personal answer to this, but I'm just curious about like what role do you think those kind of traditions have within your work, or if you're finding it more kind of rooted in like an African mythological perspective or context. Just kind of was curious how that functions within your own practice.
Yeah, so the paganism, I guess, doesn't really have that much of a connection, but you find with most pre-colonial, I might be talking out of my ass, but how I see it is like with most like pre-colonial practices, there are similarities between them. An example was, designing a sigil, and we had sigils back then, and we have sigils in my country as well. We just call them something else. as well as, things like, scarification that gives you, enhances like your abilities and blesses you. We have that as well, just under like a different name. So I guess the overlap is there based on that, but I mostly draw my stuff from like African traditions as well. And I think it's been going okay. I think I've got their blessings, but we'll see in the future, because each time I'm working on something weird just like happens. Like somebody comes to visit us and we're just like, all right, just make sure everything's all right. It's like, all right.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting when you're like, working with these kinds of like powers may be a bad word, but like you're working with the thing and then it like, it manifests something. And yeah, I'm curious about like how these kind of ideas translate into the way that we work. Like, how do these ideas like influence like the way that you're starting to like write, or the way that you practice in studio, or the way that you're like start to record, or lyrics, or yeah, I'm just wondering how it kind of feeds in and trickles in throughout. Yeah.
I think for me, I as a playwright, I feel like I'm constantly trying to create conditions in my work and in my rehearsal rooms that really privilege liveness and the sort of the kind of power of the live moment, and what can happen between an audience and a performer in that kind of sacred space of the theater. And I sort of a number of years ago wrote a book called Theater of the Unimpressed, which was really about how, about this very thing, about how can our infrastructure of theaters, how can our programming, how can our creation processes really value the thing that I felt was really sort of essential, which was just like apprehending the power of the live event, which I feel like is often in the English Canadian theater tradition, sometimes dramatic narrative. I feel like it's less attendant to that fundamental aspect, which I think makes theater special. It can feel sometimes more televisual even. It can be, like I often walk away from a play asking like, well, could this not have been just a film, or a television series, and I feel like that there's a tension for me as a writer between creating a text, which is fundamentally a fixed thing that is a blueprint for the creation of other, the replication of this story again and again in other contexts. There's a tension between that and this desire for liveness and the power of the live event and the ritual of that. And so I'm trying as much as possible in pieces like Declarations, in this new project that I have coming up called Is My Microphone On?, which is a collaboration with 20 young people under the age of 18, very much to do with the climate. And how can a text engender liveness and that kind of that ritual space of the event, and it's in terms of how that happens, I think it's sort of that special alchemy between like the people you're making with it, the people you're making the piece with in the room, and also leaving space for chance and perhaps a bit of failure each night as well. The piece Declarations, for those who haven't seen it, is each night that it's performed, the 5 performers, the gestural score is reinvented each night. So even though the text is fixed, the gestural score is spontaneously generated each night, and that creates for me this exciting tension between the rehearsed and the discovery of the live event, and it can create moments that are really funny, quite moving, sometimes very mundane, and for that I think was in my process a bit of a revelation, and trying to think, okay, so how can I apply that now to dramatic text in a more traditional dramatic text or kind of other contexts.
Okay. Yeah, for me, it's usually comes in with the perspectives just when writing. I feel like the the words my lyrics from when I started first understanding this stuff to before I did are more different. It's just now there's more of a pre-colonial mindset to it, and that also complements the sound as well, because based on the samples that I would like to pick or the sounds that I would like to pick, um, some of it comes from what the songs that my tribe would sing, the songs that a similar tribe would sing, and just like instruments that my tribe would use, especially when it comes to like the drums and just like the ordering of the drums themselves. So I think that's how it's able to show itself in my work as well. It just complements both the lyrics and the music itself and the subject matter.
I'm hearing you both speak, and it also feels like there's this, and maybe this is a basic question, but I'm gonna also ask it anyways. Is like, I feel like with Jordan, with you, you're thinking about like working with, you're working within theater, but you're trying to, work outside of maybe traditional kinds of theater, kinds of modes and ways of working. And Ashanti too, I've read some interviews with you where you speak about not feeling like you're working in hip hop, but then, like you're working outside of kind of like traditional aesthetics of sonics of like of hip hop in some way. And I don't know, I also don't want this to be a triggering question, but I mean like maybe to speak to your experience of that kind of like knowing that you're working outside of something and still placing yourself in that thing.
Okay, so with me, I think the reason why I've been saying that is, I guess not trying to, because there's some times where people be influenced by hip hop, but they don't want to call themselves rappers. But like I'm like a rapper day one to now. Like I love hip hop. I think the problem is once you start expressing your queer identity while making this experimental art, people tend to box you as like not really in the genre that you're working with, but kind of like, yeah, you're a rapper, but you're kind of a rapper. I think it's mostly the lack of just the public embracing you. I'm looking at like Lil Nas X, and Lil Nas X is one of the biggest pop stars now, but I feel like just that because he's expressing his queerness so freely, people are boxing him kind of like out of the space that is in. Like if you ask Lil Nas X will probably tell you I'm like a hip hop artist, but I think once people are challenged with radical queerness, that's when they start to box you. And I've been telling a lot of interviewers that, especially, and my experience is usually in Quebec itself. Um, Quebec hip hop doesn't really, I guess, acknowledge the stuff that I'm working on. When the Polaris shortlist was announced, they said, "Oh, could this artist be, the first trans artist to win the Polaris, prize?" And it's kind of weird because, and not being cocky or anything, but I was also like the first hip hop rapping artist from Quebec to be on the shortlist. And when they acknowledge me, it's usually just like, oh, transgender rapper, but it's never just like under the guise of rapper. So the term is like transgender rapper is kind of like them trying to put you in like your own box, just kind of like how they'll call like Lil Nas X like a queer rapper. So it's very odd. It's very odd because it's like I didn't choose to be not acknowledged, but it's like the powers that be are weird. If I could say that.
Yeah, and I think in relation to what you were saying earlier about that kind of queer space of things being undefined or sort of in a perpetual state of becoming, I feel like that for me is where I'm most excited about work that I see, and it's the space that the pieces that I have made that feel like exist in that space are the ones that I love the most, like declarations, and yet they're also the ones that like I know that if I kind of push a piece, so a lot of how I work is most of the times I begin with sort of stage images, and it's not narrative, it's kind of sensorial, it's sort of like almost like tableaus or and bits of disconjointed text, and for, it's always a question of how far do I move it towards clarity, like how far do I move it towards a finished play, like can I kind of stop it at some point in that state of becoming, and can it just exist in that state of like liminality, and I feel like that space confounds a lot of English Canadian reviewers. It's like that space will either kind of excite sort of us, like sort of art makers and art aficionados, and that sort of, there's an audience for that kind of work, which is what I love. And then if I sort of move it towards a more state of completion, then, like I might win the GG or something. It's like that's when it kind of begins to become like sort of respected and sort of like canonical and like, okay, great, now this is a finished play and this is something we can teach in schools and produce at regional theaters across Canada. But if it's like anything in that kind of messy state before good dramaturgy, then it's incomplete, or yeah, exactly. Kind of this weird queer beast, which is like, which I'd love to make. And so it's, for me, that there's always that negotiation between how far do I push it towards clarity and completion. Which ideas resist clarity and completion by their nature, like declarations, I think.
How are we doing for time right now? We're good? Are there any questions from folks out there?
I wish I could take a photograph of you guys. It's actually quite a beautiful
Right.
Dramatic performance. Yeah.
Sorry, there's a microphone that's going to come your way. There's another choreography happening, so just give us a second.
Wow, it's so, this is so fancy that I goddamn forgot my question. Yes, no. I'm curious about how this came together, like how you know each other, how the topic came about.
It's a great question. Jessie actually, Mills at the festival invited me to, like, she was like, do you, who in Montreal would you like to speak with? And the very first person I thought of was BACKXWASH, and I was so thrilled. We were all so thrilled that Ashanti said yes, and then it felt really kind of fitting with Andrew's practice, which I feel like hasn't gotten enough airtime in our conversation, but is so exquisite and so much to do with queer ritual and queer magic, and in fact, some of the so I think Andrew's work was for me some of the very formative work that I like. What was formative for me rather in my understanding of those ideas within dance, really. When back in the day when I had a space in Toronto called VideoFag, Andrew brought some beautiful pieces there, including his piece Summoning Aesthetics, which to this day remains an absolute personal highlight of mine, like programming-wise at VideoFag, and just the images are so iconic and indelible. And I feel like you still maybe have that like duct tape carpet that's like that was sort of like made to...
Yeah, it's still in some of the pieces. Like the new ones, he just keeps being reused. But it's true that like when I was first working at VideoFag, which is an amazing seminal art space in Toronto, I was here in Montreal, but I was coming to work there, and that was probably one of the first places that I started to explore like real queer kind of in a deep way, like queer ideas of magic, queer ideas of ritual. That was probably like the first time that I started to really work on those things, which has informed my practice afterwards. So this is part of how we know each other for sure. And yeah, I don't know how you and Ashanti know each other.
No, we just met moments before you guys came in. So yeah, so it's really a pleasure. It's really a fresh conversation. And
Yeah, we also follow each other on social media.
Yes, yeah.
we did. It's true. We did have a nice little chat on social media a few years ago. That's true. Actually, it's quite true. Actually, I feel like something that I've been really like pushing into, and I feel like I've been so inspired by Ashanti, your costuming and like physical, like makeup and aesthetics. We haven't really spoken really about like embodiment, and I feel like something that I've been really inspired by, and I know that we've been kind of following each other a little bit about this is, like online, sort of really embracing fetish and like fetish costuming and sort of the transformative power of mask and fetish gear, and for me in a kind of, I guess, queer sexual context. And I think, just kind of understanding the ways in which, I think when I turned 30, I kind of started sort of realizing like how kind of expansive my sexuality could be. It was like, oh, it could be kind of performative, it could be playful, it could be political, it could be, theatrical or silly or, animalistic or whatever. And I felt like I was able to sort of, like push into spaces that I just hadn't before. And I feel like I'm really inspired by the ways in which, Ashanti, you're kind of living your practice and your politic through this visual iconography that's so distinctive that you're really, I feel like, especially in this last series of portraits, I feel like with like the high contrast black and white portraiture, I feel like I'm like, yes, girl, you're really finding that aesthetic. And it's really, you're finding your trademark aesthetic, and I think it's really working for you.
Thank you. The person that usually comes up with it is my partner, Chachi, and we had this idea for like reverse face paint. And I know, being like trans and kind of finding comfort in alternative styles of just like makeup it was like really empowering for me, because I think, it's the most extreme that I've gone, and it was also a bit terrifying to look at, but I felt like the most like I felt that's the most that I felt comfortable with myself and my body during that time. And it's kind of like there was an article that said, trans musicians usually put a voice modulator on their vocals as this kind of, it kind of like walking that binary of, my voice can be anything that I want it to be. And in the distortion, I find me being most comfortable with myself. And it's kind of like that with, the art styles and the makeup of like in the terror or the distortion, I feel like the most comfortable about myself.
Yeah, is there another question maybe?
Thanks, Dana, for that question.
Hey, I'm just curious, it's sort of a question as I'm seeing people again, what got you through sort of the last 15 months, especially as artists who often either play for or work with a lot of people? I'm just curious what socially got you through, or just, music or art or, meditation, coping mechanisms, or maybe, or maybe what didn't get you through. But yeah, just curious what kind of got you through the last 15 months. And yeah, maybe what you're also looking forward to, if it can happen, if our luck continues.
Did you hear that question, Ashanti? No. We're just saying, Chad was asking how, during lockdown, and correct me if I'm wrong, if I misheard, but just how you, as an artist who, performs and works with people, and how you've coped and managed over the last 15 months, and what mechanisms you've found to survive and thrive during that time, and what you're looking forward to next.
Yeah, it was very difficult. I'm usually online when I'm talking to people anyway. And collaborations is just me usually saying, hey, I've got this space, do you want to try something? And they do it and they send me the stems. But and I'm usually an isolated person as well, but the difficultness just came with just like recording the songs and doing live streams at first. When we started doing live stream right after COVID hit, I think there are people that started doing live streams, but they had to kind of like learn how to do a proper live stream. So when you go to an event and you kind of like perform, sometimes it's like no prepared, and your live performance doesn't really translate to the live stream in itself. So we've kind of iterated on that, and kind of find a space in which we're more comfortable with. And I think it was mostly about like learning, but it's very difficult when your access to a lot of those things is limited. And recording in general was like very, very difficult. Just finding somebody who would take the chance to record your stuff was yeah, it was a mess. I think I finally found someone. Then I think Ontario closed because I was in Ottawa. But then so Ontario closed and I couldn't go there anymore. So I still had like 6 songs to do, and it was just very difficult to, because it's like, all right, maybe I should try record at home. But the space that I'm in, and I like to like scream and shout, so it's not really that good because my neighbors will come like knocking on my door. So it was difficult, but there was a lot of learning in that aspect. I see like going in the future, I think just most of the people as artists are going to bring our skills from what we learned in the lockdown, and if things do open up, bringing that forward to our normal, quote unquote, normal presentations.
Yeah. I think creatively, I was just doing a lot of writing. Really, that sort of was the only thing I could really do during that time. So I finished a second novel, which I'm excited about. And actually, the novel is very much about it's it's about it's very very much about ritual and like the and themes we're talking about right now, actually, the sort of the quest for the sacred, and I mean, to be super reductive, it's kind of about this sort of like suburban sex cult that this woman sort of finds herself kind of drawn into with sort of quite calamitous results, but it's very much about kind of our hunger for the wild, or the thing that cannot be that is beyond reason, I guess. It's called The Listeners. So that was, it was great to have the kind of solitude to work on that. But I felt like, in a way, just what we were talking about earlier about kind of like, trying not to let my sort of like relationship with my body or my sexuality atrophy during that time. I'm just sitting in front of my computer. So just like, doing photo shoots or dressing up in fetish gear, or like, finding ways to kind of engage in that on social media has been kind of a nice sort of outlet for me to do that, and continue to kind of investigate those things, in a kind of embodied way. You've been still making work though a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I took over the head of one of Canada. I've been the artistic director of one of Canada's oldest dance institutions, which I did the transition during the lockdown, which was quite a big thing. And I don't think we have enough time to talk about that here, but it has been really amazing. I think one of the things that like I found a coping mechanism, like a source of like joy and also a source of frustration, is trying to work on these ideas or set the conditions for like this kind of queer magic and work on those kinds of things in this kind of platform, like working on it on Zoom, which is like it's a platform designed for business. And then I'm like, oh, how can I make this like some kind of queer like art space? And it's like so enticing in some way, and then you hit like this wall with it. And yeah, but it has, I mean, that's been really like, that has helped me a lot and has helped me to stay connected to folks. And yeah, I mean, I can say a lot of things, but I'm also a workaholic, which I'm not saying is a good thing, and that, you know, like.
If I could, I just would love to, because Andrew's making a piece at the moment with Philip Nizuka, who is one of the original performers in Declarations. And I just feel like as an example of Zoom-based dance work and queer ritual, it's such an interesting, if you don't mind me putting you on the spot, it's an interesting project.
Sure, we're doing it next week at the Performance Mix Festival, if people want to log on. But I mean, you know, we're working with all of these things that are real, like this camera. It's in my bedroom, so the bed is a stage. We're like using Zoom filters durationally in order to set up like actual choreographic like feedback. Yeah, I think it's gonna be an interesting one. I mean, I wish you didn't mention it because I have no idea what it's gonna look like.
Yeah.
Hi. I'm also an artist who works a lot with ritual. And I really resonated with what you said about how it's like simultaneously trying to create nice spaces that are very warm and welcoming and where we can like assemble, but also we want to subvert that and create like disrespect. And I feel there's this tension between caring and subverting, perhaps, or like caring and provoking reactions, movement. Can you talk a little more about that? I know you already mentioned it, but I would love some more of your thoughts. Thank you.
Ashanti, did you hear all of that? Probably not, eh? I think the main base of the question is this this question between like subversion and care. Yeah, like I think that's what I'm getting from your question. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. How do you? I mean, maybe it's a bit. I'm not sure, Ashanti. Maybe it's a bit different if you're not working in a room with others, but you are. I'm assuming working with other musicians as well, perhaps. But just like, how do you create conditions of care, either with your collaborators in a room, or perhaps even indeed with your audience to some extent, while also, you know, being a profane badass, and you know, that tension between those two impulses. I think that's a really interesting question, and I don't necessarily have like a clear answer. But I think the thing that for me feels most charged, the thing that I would love to do more of in my work that I haven't done yet, is like try to stage some of these like relationships with sexuality and the body, and yeah, just see sort of, I don't know. I feel like it's probably a lot more commonplace, certainly in dance, but I feel like in theater as such, in Canadian theater, it feels like a very like nudity, sex, the body feel like very kind of I don't know. They're very absent actually from our stages, especially in English Canada. I mean, I'm sure it's much less the case here, and I feel like there is, and we all know that can be super a really huge minefield, right? And you know, who's running those rooms, who's being asked to do what. It's really tricky, but I feel like it's like, how do we achieve a really embodied sexual sort of progressive theater and make pieces in that mode, or even a piece in that mode, without you know, triggering trauma, without taking advantage of people. And you know, I think that's really it requires a lot of care, and there are people who specialize in that. And you know, I think it's really about navigating, like employing those expertise and yeah, and just sort of taking things very slowly, perhaps, and really having really clear communication as well. And I think, you know, on a much less fraught level, I suppose, than what I'm trying to, you know, point to here. You know, working with young people, I've ran processes or been part of processes, like written plays that have casts of young people in them. You know, performances for adults that are featuring casts of 10 or 20 teenagers. And I think, you know, one of my past collaborators, Kara Spooner, actually a present collaborator as well on this new piece I was talking about earlier, has this really beautiful kind of very simple but very powerful phrase that, how something is made affects what is made. And if your process, actually, Chad Dembski worked on that process with us too in Concord Floral. Yay! But it's so true. Like a process that is, filled with care and in which the participants are enfranchised agents. That they're in control of their own bodies, their own performance. Even if they're speaking a text, even if the text goes to some very dark and intense places, I think that idea of how something's made affects what is made is such an important governing kind of principle for us in that process.
I mean, I think that's the question right now for a lot of artists. I think that there was a history, especially in queer, like, for a while I was also into artists that just like shocked the, can I swear on this? This is being broadcast. Who used to like shock the fuck out of people, and I was like really into that. And now I find that work just like kind of being an asshole. And like I kind of went through a phase, like I was so into it, and now I'm just like, oh, now you're just being an asshole. So I'm definitely trying to consider how to be a considerate asshole in terms of how to set the context. Like, for example, if we're going to be dealing with things that are possibly going to bring up trauma or be triggering for people, how can we set the context for an audience to experience that work that feels supported? So is that about like bringing in, someone who specializes in that issue for people to speak to afterwards? Is it about like, what can we do to set the context? Because we still also need to take risks, because the one thing with that question that can get really slippery is that we can lean into like, we're going to be so considerate of everything that we can't move, or it becomes like we're a day at the spa, which is like not what I'm into. So yeah, it's such a good question. Like I really love that question. I wonder, Ashanti, how you're dealing with that.
Yeah, it's a very difficult I guess line to cross, because I guess when you're composing albums or projects in like music or film, you kind of want to, well, for the type of art that I create, I kind of want to leave a lot of mystery surrounding what I'm going to talk about or what people are going to expect. It becomes very difficult when the stuff that I'm diving into is can be like really triggering. And I got a bit of traction last year, so to my shock and complete terror, they're like 13-year-olds or 12-year-olds who like listen to this stuff, and that is scary for me, because it might go to a place in which some people are not really ready for. And I guess my thing is maybe trying to illustrate that before they listen to the music, make sure they're not in like in a place where they wouldn't be comfortable listen to those topics, especially when you're doing something with a lot of something that's very cathartic in nature. But it's very difficult kind of walking that line of leaving mystery to also also providing care. Also with my collaborators, I usually make sure that they're okay with like the topic at hand. Like, hey, I'm gonna send you to do this thing. Are you okay putting a piano about this? The song is about this, and that. And if they say yes or if they say no, that's like totally fine. But I guess it's just because it's like art, and you're trying to expose. You don't want to like expose the cake, but you want to warn people what's in the cake, if that makes sense. So yeah, I've been trying to toe that line a bit, and hopefully I can create a space in which people kind of like know the type of music that I'm making. I had this person was like, you know what you should do? You should like make a song and like rap trigger warnings, and I'm like, I'm not gonna like do that. So yeah, it's very difficult to toe that line, but I think it's part of like developing your practice is just like learning how to do that more effectively. It's kind of like the way most horror movies are able to express, trauma in very creative ways. But horror movies are all about mystery as well, and a horror movie doesn't really want to show you what it's about before you actually watch it. So it's yeah.
Are we good with time right now? Is that where we're at? Oh, a question. Okay,
Oui,
sorry.
j'ai une question d'une personne en ligne. Donc, Jordan Arsenault dit loving this discussion and asking, when I think about the sublime, I always think about William Blake's poetry and the etymological sense of standing under a threshold or at the base of a cliff. What, might I ask, does each of you see as insurmountable, undying, and outside of us?
Well, I think, I mean, it's such a kind of cliched answer, but I am constantly humbled by nature and by the cycles of nature and by the cosmos. And I think, I think that's one of the things that I sort of sometimes struggle with, or have to kind of constantly negotiate, I guess, with ideas of like queer spirituality, is like sometimes I feel like I don't necessarily want to just place myself and my own sexuality or my like my body at the center of that cosmos. It's like about how do you sort of like, for me, like acknowledge that I'm part of this massive system that is so much greater than me. And I find personally immense comfort in the idea of the finite nature of life, that like I end, I return to nature, and I'm part of this larger cycle. And for me, the idea of like, so many faith systems are predicated on the idea of someone living for eternity and, going to an afterlife. And that just like stresses me the fuck out. It's like, I do not want to live forever. That fucking terrifies me. And so I feel like it's such a, it's both overwhelming and insurmountable, the scale of nature, the scale of the cosmos, and how absolutely infinitesimal my contribution to this, this live experience of life is, and yet it's also profoundly comforting.
I just want to make sure I'm understanding the question. It's about like the relationship to the sublime and how it like humbling, and what do we find humbling? Yeah, I think like I was just thinking that I find like the experiences I find the most humbling, because I'm really into these ideas of like criticality and belief at the same time. And I feel like what I find the most humbling is when I'm being maybe critical or skeptical of some of these ideas about magic, about like whatever, and then they actually happen anyways, or these moments like Ashanti was describing happen, and you see them, even though you're skeptical. For me, that's the most humbling moment, because that's where it reveals its real power to me. Because I was like critical of it, I was skeptical, but then it's like there, and you see it. Like that for me is like a really kind of humbling moment in relationship to the sublime. Like that would be like a sublime moment for me.
Yeah, for me, I guess something really sublime and humbling would be people relating, I guess, to the music that you're making is really like, I guess there are two parts of it. One part is, because you're putting yourself in a manner like that, somebody can just message you like, hey, like, I almost like committed suicide a few months ago, and this music was like on my playlist, and stuff like that. And on one hand, if you're not like in the right space to like receive that information, because it can be like really traumatic, you're like, oh, thank you for like telling me. But on the other hand, for you to go to the same thing as somebody else is also going to the same thing is also humbling, because you know that you're not the only one who's feeling that way. and people are drawn to what you do, and you're drawn to them because there's a lot of I guess there's a lot of relating to each other based on feelings and whatnot, and that's just like just writing these like little raps like in my room, that's like really humbling to me, just for like people to be able to just like say that.
I think we're at the hour, but is there one more question perhaps I mean, that was a lovely last question if that is the last one, but just want to make sure everyone's had a chance. Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much for those questions. They were great. And yeah, and this was like personally just such a pleasure, an honor to be chatting with both of you. And yeah, what a great way to start the Sunday. Like it's like way better than embracing espresso.
Yeah, thank you everyone for being here. Thank you, Ashanti. Thank you, Jordan. Thanks to everyone who showed up today. And yeah, I guess we'll leave it at that. I'm really still thinking about this last thing that you said, Ashanti. I never considered this kind of connection as humbling. That's like really sticking with me right now. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you. Take care, guys. Thank you.